Hey there, CivOppers. Welcome back to another episode of CivOps Gear, reviewing all the EDC gear for everyone from the discerning civilian all the way to the experienced operator. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment on these videos, as well as follow us on Instagram at CivOps_gear. Today, I want to address that some of you may not be happy with this particular knife. I feel like there is a generational gap with the Gerber 06. I just got this knife recently, came in from Knife Center. Of course, any complaints I have about the knife have nothing to do with Knife Center. They are one of my preferred retailers. But that is where I got this knife from. I had some points to use, and I got this knife, which is normally $200-something for $110. And I've always wanted to get my hands on a Gerber 06 Auto. I played with one when I was a kid that belonged to a friend of mine. And it was sort of my first entree as a kid into the fact that there were some cool knives out there. But you know, there are some problems with the 06. And this story has a happy ending, but it's a dreadful story. So let's get into what's going on with the Gerber 06, okay? The Gerber 06 Auto, safety, huge push button for the auto release. I happen to get the one with the aluminum scales with the serrated Tonto blade. It is proudly made in Portland, Oregon, S30V steel. It's a serious knife. It's built like a tank. It is a serious knife that was designed and built for the military years and years ago. Let me tell you my first impression when I opened the box on this Gerber 06 Auto. As a knife collector today, I was thoroughly unimpressed when I opened the box. The action was slow, apathetic, if you will. It was lagging. It was unimpressive. It didn't have any real snap to it. The blade was wildly off center. And so I thought to myself, as an avid knife collector and disassembler and oiler, cleaner, and reassembler, I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to take this Gerber 06 apart day one of ownership, and I'm going to clean it up and see what I can do to it. Well, right away, I ran into some issues, some build quality issues, some things that I think, I'll just be straight up with you. I think Gerber needs to probably redesign and rethink how they build this knife, because at the time this knife was designed and created, probably it was a killer. But today, it has so many other knives to compete with that I just don't know that this is the icon that it once was in operator knives. However, there is a happy ending to this story, so stick around. I started disassembling this knife. I started with the rear screws, which are T8, and right away, I ran into a screw that did not want to budge. So I moved on to the next one and the next one. I did, with enough pressure, get these two to unscrew, okay? And when I pulled them out, I realized that Gerber is using not only red Loctite, but gobs of red Loctite, gobs of it. And I didn't record the taking apart of this knife, and frankly, I'm glad I didn't, because it took me 2.5 days to get it put back together. And I would not have wanted to make you guys sit through that. So I'm just going to go over what happened and just tell you. There was so much red Loctite on these two that I said, okay, I'm going to have to get the heat gun to get this guy out. I hit this bad boy with a heat gun for way longer than you should have to hit anything with a heat gun. Went back to it, tried 3 different T8 bits, and still I stripped it. It stripped. It still, to this moment, has not budged. So much red Loctite. This one screw is completely stripped, will not budge. When I finally got the knife disassembled, I was unable to take the backspacer out because this one screw still has not come out. There's one issue. I was able to get the other screws out. The pivot uses a T10. This one up here is a T8. And then you unscrew the same one on this side, T8. T8's here. I was able to get the clip off, so that's fine. I was able to get the scale on the back side off, the liner off, but I was not able to separate the show side scale and liner because this one stripped screw remained all the way through the back spacer. So I took this knife apart and cleaned it up, re-oiled it. It came nicely oiled. I mean, it had plenty of lube in there, but the action was just so unimpressive. So the first day of trying to get it put back together, I failed miserably. I could not get this thing to go back together. You can see there's a little pin right there that doesn't get screwed in on either side. It just sits loose. And then this pin here, the blade stop, that pin does screw in, but if you screw it in before you put the blade on, then the blade sits loosely while you're trying to put it back together. The spring, I'm not sure, fits into the groove in the blade entirely. There are no washers in this blade. There are just grooves cut into the liners. And so the blade spins freely around not only the pivot, but there's a collar around the pivot. So there are more parts than there need to be, and reassembling the knife is extremely difficult. By the end of day one, I had almost given up. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do? Do I just throw this thing away? This knife sucks. And in today's world of unbelievable knives, this icon of knifery is failing to impress. Let me cut to the point here. A day and a half afterwards, I finally went back to it, came back to the mat, figured I'm going to give this one more try. I was able, with enough persistence, to finally get this put back together correctly. And it was not easy. There was so much Loctite residue on the screws that even screwing the screws back in was difficult, okay? Even after cleaning them up. Here's the irony of this. I put it back together. Everything felt kind of loose. It didn't quite feel right. When I got everything tightened down, I solved the centering issue and I solved the action issue. Now it is very snappy. It's got a great action to it now. The centering is dead on. And normally you have to do something on purpose to get a knife to be better. But in this case, I just put it back together in a way that I didn't even think was going to end up being great and solved all the issues. So now I understand why this knife is appealing to some people. Now I get it. This is most certainly an operator knife, especially the fact that it was built for the military. Now I see the good snappy action. The S30V Tonto blade is very, very piercy and punctury. The serrations are very cutty. The size of the action button can easily be hit with gloves on. You can have some thick cut-proof or tactical gloves on and deploy this no problem. Let me see what I think this knife really would compare to. A lot of people don't know this existed, but this is a CRKT M16 Auto. And this also was designed with operators in mind. The CRKT M16 has always been sort of a first responders geared knife. It is large and in charge. This particular auto, made in the USA, of course, just like the Gerber, CRKT made in the USA. This uses a CPM 154 steel blade, the M16-04A, the 04 Auto. And as you can see, if you know M16s, this does not have any steel liners inside it. It is just the aluminum scales and nothing else inside except for the internal springs and mechanisms to deploy and hold the blade. This one is nicely centered, and clearly this has a large push button as well, with a safety mechanism on the spine of the blade, which deploys right there, that little switch. Locked. unlocked. And is this the fastest action? Would this compare to like your ProTech? No, but it is a large 4-inch blade of 154 steel, and it deploys fast enough, and it's not quite as loud as your ProTechs either, or your Microtechs, or anything that are, you know, going to take your finger off if you get in the way. So it's lightweight. I mean, forget skeletonized. This is just a big slab of aluminum with big holes right through it and no liners. So I would compare the Gerber 06 to the CRKT M16 Auto. The Gerber blade is what, 3.7, 3.8, something like that. Big hunky piece of S30V. The M16 doesn't have the serrations, but it's a good 4-inch long, large blade of 154 CPM 154. I would compare these two probably as both being large operator knives. I would also maybe put the Boker Kalashnikov XXL, which is a ridiculous knife. But I mean, you know, if you're an operator with gloves on, the activation button is large enough, you can hit it. As opposed to the Gerber and the M16, the activation button on the Boker is flush, so you don't quite feel it as much protruding from the scales as you do on the M16 and on the Gerber 06. But I would also probably put the Boker Kalashnikov, at least certainly the XXL, in there. This is made of D2 steel, and you know, this one is not American made, although it is certainly a beefy, huge tank of a knife. Is it quite dead centered? You know, this isn't quite the premium knife that the other two really like to be and are, but this is a, this blade is 4 1/4, 4.5 inches, something ridiculous. The Boker XXL Kalashnikov is just a massive thing. So point I'm getting at is, now that I figured out how to get the Gerber 06 back together, boy, it solved all the problems, and I don't even really know what I did to solve the problems, but it's nicely centered. The action is much, much better, and I now understand the appeal of this knife. But I still say, this knife was designed and originally built, my God, 20 years ago or more. And even though it was built for the military, and I understand now why, I say that in today's world of knifery, Gerber may want to rethink this. I think that they could make it a more solid, more impressive auto in today's world. But now that I've got it working, I do understand. My issue is, I shouldn't have had to take this apart and get it working. For a nearly $200 American-made knife from Gerber, who used to be an iconic name. They used to be the name in knives, partly because of this knife. I shouldn't have had to take it apart and stumble around for 2 days and get lucky enough to fix it better. But now that it is fixed better, I get it. It's cool. If you haven't played with one yet, I will put a link to this particular knife from Knife Center in the description of the video. You can go ahead and pick yourself one up. If you've got any points on Knife Center, go ahead and use those. If not, buy this knife and then you will have points. The CRKT has been long discontinued. I've owned this several years. You might find one on some blade forums or maybe even on eBay, although it's an auto, so it probably won't be listed as auto. The Boker XXLs are still available. Get these at Blade HQ. I believe they might be an exclusive. I'm not positive, but I'll throw a link up for Blade HQ. I think you can get these in Desert Warrior as well, with the OD green and the Desert Tan blades. There you go. There's 3 operator knives. The Gerber certainly is all operator. The CRKT M16 is largely what I would consider, at least out of my collection, the closest thing to compete with it. And the Boker XXL is in there for good measure, or large measure as the case may be. Hope this was helpful. If you were struggling with your Gerber 06, you are not alone. I struggled as well. I would recommend not taking it apart, but if you do, you may end up just putting it back together even better. Thanks, guys. See you on the very next CivOps gear review. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at CivOps_gear. Bye-bye.